Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. George Russell stirring controversy going into the Miami Grand Prix, claiming that if he'd come into Formula 1 a couple of years earlier, he would already be a two-time world champion. Is he missing the points compared to former teammate Lewis Hamilton? Plenty of drama and talking points going into Miami this weekend. For Hamilton, Twitter, your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. We're going to start here with the masterpiece, as Stake describe it. New livery on the Stake F1 team Kick Sauber machine. And I'm not going to lie, it's one of the worst special liveries I think you could ever wish to see. So I don't really know what they're cooking here, but they've dropped a load of Flovies on their car, effectively. And, I mean, I guess they got a nice video out of it. But usually special liveries, they change the colour of it. It was green, it's still green, and it's a worse green than before. So they've got a nice little visual render here of dropping all this paint on the car. And then, well, here's the aftermath when, I mean, it just looks absolutely awful. So, yeah, load of Flovies, effectively, so it looks like anyway. But it was green and it's still green. It's like, well, what's even the point doing a special livery when it basically looks the same, but even worse? So there you go. Congratulations, Sauber. One of the worst special liveries that I think you could ever see. And this is another angle if you guys wanted to really bask in the glory of what Sauber are doing this weekend. We do tend to see a lot of special liveries over the years. Certainly this weekend in Miami, there's been lots of talk that there might even be more. There definitely will be a special Ferrari livery. Now, of course, last year they had the blue livery they put on the car because of the HP partnership. This year they've said, oh, it's 1 year since we had the partnership, so let's run it back, basically, and that's what they're doing here. So this is the New Year's version of the old thing, and I mean, look, great. It's blue, it's white. Is it fast? I mean, that's always my talking point. Okay, maybe it looks kind of nice. You guys might like it, might not like it, whatever. I know that some people are maybe more purists will say that, well, you know, blue was a colour that Ferrari used back in the day, and white, obviously, they've used over time as well. But many will say, look, Ferraris should be red. Doesn't matter if it's slow, I think that's the point. They weren't bad around here last year. This was last year's version, which definitely caused a lot of controversy. This is the new one, which to be fair, I think I do prefer, certainly the caps, over what they're running with last year. So, but yeah, that's my opinion anyway. And of course, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc looking good as ever, but, you know, only so much, or it only gets you so many points in the championships, of course. So tonight, this evening Italian time, probably shortly after this video goes live, there will be an unveiling of the livery that they will be running. There have been some, at least, theories on what it might look like. This is potentially one of them, just purely based on what we've already seen with the race suits and stuff. Look, would you like a Ferrari that looked like this? We're going to see very shortly whether this is actually going to be what it looks like or if it's going to be anything somewhat like this. But look, Ferrari need a big weekend in Miami. The reality is they need a big couple of weekends because the season hasn't started well. Vasseur says we are ready to get back on track in Miami. We want to continue improving the performance of the SF25, encouraged by the good progress seen in the Bahrain and Jeddah races. Is there progress? I mean, look, they at least scored some points. That's better than nothing, I suppose, compared to what they had back in China. But obviously Hamilton's been struggling to deal with the car. Charles Leclerc definitely feels a bit happier, but it's certainly not optimal right now. So lots of progress that Ferrari need to make. The plan was potentially to bring an upgrade for Miami. They've elected not to do so because it's a sprint weekend, only 1 hour of practice. They are going to delay that over the next couple of rounds. As we saw yesterday, they may wait until effectively Spain, at which point they will then decide, okay, what did the new technical directive do? Should we continue to push forward with the SF25 or simply abandon ship? Questions on Hamilton, we'll get to more of them in a second with what George Russell has to say. But Alex Brundle, who I think always does some great analysis, of course, Martin Brundle's son, was discussing effectively Hamilton's driving style and why it's a bit of a problem for this current Ferrari. So Hamilton's strength, certainly pre-ground effect, this was like such a massive advantage that he had, is to brake very hard, very late, carry more speed into the entry of the corner. These ground effect cars don't really like that as much as some of the other ones do, and potentially especially the Ferrari. Now, Leclerc had to adapt his own driving style to this over the last couple of years, and it took Sainz longer than it did Leclerc to understand what to do. Now, having got to grips with that, Leclerc and Sainz were both particularly competitive, and it seems that Hamilton is trying, but, well, so far struggling to really get to grips with what this particular car needs, and maybe even the ground effect era in general. Whether Hamilton has the time or the ability, certainly the age that he is, to kind of reinvent his driving style, it's a big challenge, obviously, for any driver, even one of the greatest of all time. So, especially given all that Hamilton's had 40 years of muscle memory, right? Like, pretty much, this is not an easy thing to change. So, the traits that we're talking about here is that he goes into high-speed corners and hits a little bit more brake pressure than Charles Leclerc. You can draw a line directly up the wheel speed graph to the steering trace, and the brake aligns perfectly with a tiny bit of movement. It just upsets the Ferrari. Leclerc is measured on the brakes. We know that Lewis has a problem with the same thing. I saw the data at Mercedes. Can he coach himself out of a lifetime's worth of driving technique to move towards the car? We shall see in due course. Let's talk driver market. This is actually a pretty big one. So, two big rumours of the driver market this season, one of which, of course, was that Lawson, Tsunoda, what was going to happen there. They made the call. The next big rumour at the Red Bull camp is, well, are they going to kick out Lawson and put Lindblad in? But let's not forget, when that whole Red Bull drama was happening, there was a theory that maybe Red Bull were going to kick Lawson immediately, entirely, and bring in Colapinto, which didn't make much sense, because I thought he's now an Alpine guy, obviously, and Alpine have serious sponsors supporting Colapinto as the, obviously the reserve driver as it stands. Now, Jack Doohan has not been stellar this season. He's not been terrible. He's been somewhere in between. He's had bad weekends, sure, but his pace when he's been on it has not been that bad. Gasly, of course, has had a great most recent couple of rounds, although Saudi, as expected, wasn't quite so strong for their engine. But there was talk yesterday, live on television, from one of his sponsors, basically, that Colapinto's going to get the drive, and soon. So, this is particularly interesting, right? So people were discussing Franco is what's going on here? And this was the clip. Look, obviously it's in Spanish, but I did want to share what they have to say, because, what you can tell here, even if you don't speak the language, is that basically he was asked the question, when's this going to happen, right? Is Colapinto coming in? When's he going to debut with Alpine? What does that look like? And he says, I don't know what's going on. And then they cut to a break. So potentially he didn't realize that the mic was still hot. I mean, maybe he was going to say it anyway, but you're on these broadcasts. You can see, you're sitting at the broadcast, you can see what the live feed is, and you can see that change in real time to what the viewers are going to see when they see it from home, potentially not realizing the mic was still live, and therefore he says in Imola at the end, which, you can hear even if you don't speak Spanish, and maybe you can read between the lines.
Rubino, estoy con vos en Diputados.
En Imola.
So this has raised questions. What's happening with Colapinto? Is he going to get that drive or not? It was a big rumour before the season began that, Colapinto's going to get the drive at some point. The big rumour, let's not forget, was 6 races into the year. That's when they were going to make the change and Colapinto was going to come in. And Miami is the 6th race, and Imola is the 7th Grand Prix. Then it's Monaco, then I think it's Spain. So it would align with some of the theories before the season that Doohan has effectively a 6-race contract, but actually the rumour was that 6-race contract, or the 6-race guarantee, included Abu Dhabi last year, which would take us now beyond the 6 races. So, Doohan racing this weekend will take him beyond 6 Grand Prix with Alpine. So the then feeling was, okay, maybe they're going to give Doohan at least until the summer break. He's potentially got new backing and new sponsors on board. Unfortunately for Doohan, I feel like it is kind of inevitable. Like, they wouldn't sign Colapinto to like a 4-year deal with loads of money and get loads of sponsorship revenue coming in if they weren't getting him in the car at some point. And Briatore plays these games. This is what he does for a living. So I'm not surprised if Colapinto gets the drive, but I would be surprised on recent evidence if he comes in for Imola, right? I think maybe there was a feeling that, okay, Doohan might at least be safe until the summer break, given a bit more runway to prove himself, but now there are rumours emerging today from one of the chief sponsors of Colapinto that, yes, Imola, you may see him debut. Now, the piece on the debut is interesting, right? Because is that just a free practice session, which is possible, but it would be a very confusing thing to do to put him in a free practice session because, of course, he's no longer a rookie, so it doesn't count towards your rookie testing time that you're mandated to do in FP1 sessions. So if you were going to put Colapinto in for FP1, it's just a kick in the teeth to Doohan to say, yeah, you're getting kicked out soon, mate. Like, we're not even doing this because we have to. We're simply doing it to make a point or make the sponsors happy or whatever. So if that's what he's referring to, maybe he's joking, I don't know. But maybe he doesn't really know what's actually happening and what Briatore might decide to do. But just keep it in mind that Colapinto apparently might debut in Imola. Whether, as I say, that's a free practice session, which would kind of not make any sense, or whether that is he's in the car, that is a question that we may see an answer to shortly if we do a tour. Equally with Cadillac. So Cadillac this weekend on the 3rd of May, their plan is to unveil everything. They have like a launch event basically for the new Cadillac Formula 1 team. Now, there is a theory that potentially Sergio Perez could be getting involved. We think that he might be getting the drive there. It would make an awful lot of sense for a couple of angles. So just stay tuned. A couple of days' time, potentially Perez could be announced to Cadillac as soon as that, if the rumour actually does come true. FIA, they're at it again. Ben Sulayem with back-to-back days trying to cover himself, in my opinion, right? So this is a very interesting one, actually a shocking one, to be perfectly honest. You guys may remember the name Shayla Ann Rao. Now, we talked about her a little while ago now because she used to work for Mercedes. She used to be effectively Toto Wolff's right-hand man. Then she went to the FIA. This is not an uncommon thing, just to keep in mind, like, you know, plenty of individuals at the FIA have connections to or have previously raced, or not raced necessarily, but, you know, competed for various teams that, or at least, let's say, worked for various teams, even on an administrative perspective, and now work for the FIA. Now, they're meant to be neutral, they're meant to be totally impartial, and, you know, generally there's a feeling that, okay, yes, you may have worked for Mercedes, but you can still be impartial in this regard. But there were questions, right? Because in 2021, when the cost cap was broken by Red Bull and there was all the drama in the middle of 2022, turned out Shayla Ann Rao was actually, well, in discussions with the cost cap drama of that season, and there was a feeling that, well, maybe it's Mercedes pulling the strings and Toto Wolff pulling the strings, and those relationships are somewhat compromised. Now, of course, all the parties involved said this is not fair, but Shayla Ann Rao eventually did actually get kicked out of the FIA after she brought claims of, let's say, malpractice or mistreatment, let's say, from Ben Sulayem, her boss, right? So she had made the statement at some point that she wasn't happy with the way that Ben Sulayem was running things, and all of a sudden she gets kicked out of the FIA. But now she's back. So what's going on here, right? Because this is the article describes. Rao worked on the Costco investigation, and she then left, or she departed at the end of 2022 before reports surfaced that she had accused Ben Sulayem of misconduct, which then emerged shortly afterwards. But now she's going to be back. So Miss Rao will provide advice to the FIA president on a range of issues, including regulatory and commercial matters related to the 7 FIA World Championships in the various disciplines. She will recommence her role commence the new role on the 1st of May 25, which is, what, tomorrow, right? So it's all very confusing how somebody was fired effectively, or at least stepped away from the FIA because of controversies behind the scenes involving Ben Sulayem, and now she's back in again. So, you know, who knows what's happening here anyway. This isn't a story that's going to make, like, crazy headlines, but it is certainly another strange one. The story, though, that I think is making the headlines today is this. Now, this came out a couple of days ago now. I was waiting for the opportune time to mention it, and let's do it right about now. So, George Russell, a very confident driver, and for very good reason. Russell is an excellent driver. I think often he does get underrated to some degree by the fans, but he is, you know, extremely confident in his own abilities. He will back himself against absolutely anyone, and sometimes that rubs the fans up the wrong way, and maybe for good reason, depending on your perspective, right? So this, of course, was a battle that the two gentlemen had back in Miami 2022, when the W13 was not great. To be what is this, Bottas in front when Sauber came P5 that weekend. So I'm pretty sure that was the case. Anyway, the interview, though, that Russell did the other day with The Athletic, that caused a bit of controversy. So Russell mentioned a wide array of things, but the key piece that he talked about was when he joined Formula 1, and certainly when he got the promotion to Mercedes. Because, you know, whatever you think about Russell, on some level he got rather unlucky. Mercedes dominated for 8 years in a row, winning 8 consecutive drivers or constructors championships. Russell was stuck at Williams for a large period of that. He finally gets the opportunity at Mercedes, and the car goes, you know, the car falls off a cliff, right? And they struggle for the entirety of the Grand Effect era with only very rare pole positions and race wins to speak of over the last couple of years. Last year was better, for sure, with the W15, but, you know, Russell, on some level, has been kind of unlucky, you could argue, with what's happened in his career. And even, like, who knows if Max Verstappen was to join Mercedes and all of a sudden Mercedes become dominant again in 2026, that would be an absolute gut-wrencher. So Russell was talking about it because his time alongside Lewis Hamilton was very impressive. I think Russell did a very commendable job, some better than others, and I think there are various caveats to be had in this general discussion, but Russell's opinion is pretty black and white here. He says the following: there was once a time that if you finished ahead of Lewis Hamilton at a race, you would win the race, or if you'd finish ahead in the championship, you would win the championship. Going on to say, if my time was 5 years prior, you could argue I'd have 2 championships to my name, right? Which is quite the statement to make, really, from George, who has, of course, 0 championships to his name and not all that many race victories either. Does he have a point? I mean, look, you can talk about it, you can argue about it, but I think there are some various caveats that need to be discussed here, right? Because, okay, sure, when Hamilton was dominating the championships, if you were to beat him, yeah, you'd win the Grand Prix and you'd likely win the championship too. But beating Hamilton then, in those circumstances, was definitely a different beast to beating him over the last couple of years, because the circumstances are very different. First of all, 22, 23, 24, when they were teammates, the car wasn't good enough to compete for the championship. So certainly in 2022, Hamilton was largely a guinea pig for a large part of the season, doing loads of sensor work, doing loads of testing work that eventually kind of helped out the team, we think, maybe over the last couple of years. They finally got their act together this year eventually. But, Hamilton is a different animal when he actually has a title potential on the line, I would say. And, of course, in race pace, qualifying was always very close between the two of them until the final year. But in race pace, plenty of examples of Hamilton just having significantly more pace in the car than George over the last couple of years. But 2 out of those 3 years, George did finish the season ahead of Hamilton. These were the 2022 driver standings. Hamilton was 6th, Russell was 4th. In 2023, of course, Hamilton was 3rd, very nearly 2nd actually, and Russell was down in 8th in the end. And then the final year in 2024, we saw that Russell and Hamilton were very close, and it actually turned out that a final lap overtake at Abu Dhabi meant that over their time as teammates, Hamilton did outscore Russell by the most, barest of margins, shall we say. So, pretty amazing time as teammates. I think Russell definitely should be commended for being as competitive against Hamilton as he was, but also it's a different story, right? Like, Hamilton in that era was not maybe the same Hamilton he was before. I mean, if you're talking that George was coming in 2018 and beating Lewis, like, good luck with that, right? Like, that was prime Lewis Hamilton in a car that suited him perfectly compared to the Grand Effect era cars. And, I mean, I don't think anyone was beating him in that scenario, realistically. So for Russell to come in and say, well, if I'd have teamed with Hamilton for a few years, I'd have beaten him in 2 of the years, just as I did over the last 3 titles, beat him in 2 of the seasons. And look, I respect a driver backing themselves, absolutely. But to make the claim that, oh yeah, well, if I was at Mercedes earlier, I'd have beaten Hamilton in that scenario, it just doesn't, like, you've got to consider there's some nuances here in play. As I mentioned, that Hamilton was a better driver, in my opinion, back then than he is today. Hamilton's still excellent, but that was real prime Hamilton. 2018, 2019, like those kind of years was when Hamilton was basically unbeatable, so in tune with the car was doing everything that he wanted. It's difficult to imagine that Russell could have gone in there. Look, would he have done a better job than Bottas? Yes, I do believe so, but would he have been able to beat Hamilton in 2/3 of the seasons? Like, absolutely not, in my opinion. But look, I always respect a driver, because if they don't have this mentality that George has, then I think that they're at some point destined to fail and not be the best. I mean, Russell is convinced that if you put him in the same car as Max, he would beat him. And whatever you think about whether George is a clown for that, like, I think he needs to have that mentality. And I think that it makes him better and more feared as a driver. Like, Russell isn't quite on the level of, Verstappen or, in my opinion, even a Leclerc. But Russell's very close. I mean, he might be the 3rd best driver on the grid right now. Definitely arguable. Obviously, there's a big debate where you put Piastri and Lando in these conversations, where Lewis still is, because he's obviously going to still be in the mix. Alonso can't be too far away, right? There's other drivers that you've got to think about here, but George so far this season has been excellent, and he's going to back himself as maybe is understandable to say. Obviously, Rob Myers had his take on it, which I thought was pretty funny. But you did get this from Mark Hughes in the replies. He says, look, I think George is the fastest teammate that Lewis has had since Alonso. It's a great credit to late career Lewis that he was actually on a par with George. So, look, people are going to have their different perspectives on this. Definitely intrigued to your thoughts on it in the comments section below. Just before we close out, a couple of stats. This is a pretty wild one. Now, I love stats like these. I don't love all the stats, but this stat especially is pretty tasty, I'm not going to lie. So, in these years, we had drivers win at least 3 of the opening 5 Grand Prix of the year. Now, of course, many of these names are repeated, but it must well be mentioned that every single driver you see on this list at some point had either won the World Championship or went on to do so. We're talking Ascari, Fangio, Jim Clark, Jack Brabham, Jackie Stewart, Emerson Fittipaldi, Niki Lauda, Alan Prost, Ayrton Senna, Nigel Mansell, Prost again, then Schumacher. Hill did it in 96, Hakkinen did it in 98, Alonso, Button, Vettel, Hamilton, Rosberg, Verstappen. That is your list of names, and it's a pretty compelling list of names. Joining that list of names this year is Oscar Piastri. He won round 2, he won round 4 and round 5. And that means that he joins this list of drivers who at some point won the title. So it would definitely be an interesting timeline if we look back on this list in another 50 years and the only driver who ever achieved 3 of the first 5 races of the season and didn't win it was Piastri. Now, of course, back in the day, there were fewer Grand Prix in a year, so winning 3 of 5 was, that would set you up real nice. This season, it's not so clear if things change, but let's just say Piastri is in good company when it comes to trying to get this championship over the line. It's still early days, of course. Very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. These are the UK times for the upcoming weekend. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.